Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Gopi Janavallabha Giri Bharadari Yasoda Nandana Braja Jana Ranjana Yamunatira Banachari Jaira Dhamma Dhava Kunja Bihari Hare Krishna Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama Hare Rama 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 Hare Hare Jaya Prabhupada Prabhupada Jaya Prabhupada Jaya Prabhupada Jaya Om Vishnupad Paramahamsa Parvajikacharya To Tadasata Shri Śrimad Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada Ki Ananta Koti Vaishnava Vrinda Ki Grantaraj Śrimad Bhāgavatam Ki Samveda Bhaktivinoda Ki Gaur Premanandi. All glories to the Assembly devotees. All glories to the Assembly devotees. All glories to the Assembly devotees. All glories to Sri Sri Guru and Sri Gauranga. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Ajnanatimidandasya Gananjana Shalakaya Chakshur Unmilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Shri Chaitanya Manobishtam Shtapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kadamaham Dadati Swapadantikam Vandehang Shri Guru Shri Yuta Padakamalam Shri Gurun Vaishnavamscha Shri Rupam Sagrajatam Sahagana Raghunatan Vitam Tam Sajivam Sadvaitam Savadhunam Parijana Sahitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Padan Sahagana Lalita Shri Vishakhanvitamscha He Krishna Karuna Sindho Dinabandho Jagatpate Gopesha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namostute Tapta Kanchana Gaurangi Radhe Vrindavan Eshvari Vrishabhanu Sute Devi Pranamami Hari Priye Vanchakalpa Tarubhyascha Kripa Sindhubhya Evacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha. Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shivasadi Gaur Bhaktavinda. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Okay, we are on Canto 3, Chapter 19, Text 29 and 30. So 29 has no purport. I'll just read it on my own, and then we can collectively do number 30. Etau tau parshadav asya shapad yatav asadgatim puna Katipayastanam prapatyete hajanmabihi. These two personal assistants of the Supreme Lord, having been cursed, have been destined to take birth in demoniac families. After a few such births, they will return to their own positions. Okay, so here is the verse we will do collectively. Deva uchuhu Namo namaste kihal Namo namaste kila yagya tantave Namo namaste kila yagya tantave Stito grihita malasattva murtaye Stito grihat malasattva murtaye Dishya hatoyam jagatam aruntudas Dishya hatoyam jagatam aruntudas Tvat pada bhaktya vayam isha nirvrtaha Tvat pada bhaktya vayam isha nirvrtaha Deva uchuhu Namo namaste kila yagya tantave Stito grihita malasattva murtaye Dishtya hatoyam jagatam aruntudas Tvat pada bhaktya vayam isha nirvrtaha Deva uchuhu Namo namaste kila yagya tantave Stito grihita malasattva murtaye Dishtya hatoyam jagatam aruntudas Tvat pada bhaktya vayam isha nirvrtaha Deva uchuhu Namo namaste kila yagya tantave Stitau grihatmala sattva murtaye Dishyahatoyam jagatam aruntudas. Tvatpada bhukya vayam isha nirvritaha. Deva uchuhu. Namo namaste kila yagya tantave. Tito grihatta malasattva murtye. Dishyahatoyam jagatam aruntudas. Tvatpada bhukya vayamisha nirvritaha. Eva uchuhu. Namo namaste kila yagya tantave. Tito grihita malasattva murtaye. Dishtyahato yang jagatam aruntudas. Tvatpada bhaktya vayam isha nirvritaha. Deva uchuhu. Namo namaste kila yagya tantave. Tito grihita malasattva murtaye. Drishyahatoyam jagatam aruntudas. Tvatpada bhaktya vayamisha nirvritaha. Devaha, the demigods. Uchuhu, said. Namaha, obeisances. Namaha, obeisances. Te, unto you. Akila yagya tantave, the enjoyer of all sacrifices. Sthitao, for the purpose of maintaining. Grihita, assumed. Amala, pure. Sattva, goodness. Murtaye, form. Drishya, fortunately. Hataha, slain. Ayam, this. Jagatam, to the worlds. Aruntuda, causing torment. Tvatpada, to your feet. Bhuktya, with devotion. Vayam, we. Isha, O Lord. Nirvrtaha, have attained happiness. So the translation is as follows. The demigods address the Lord, all obeisances unto you. You are the enjoyer of all sacrifices. And you have assumed the form of a boar in pure goodness for the purpose of maintaining the world. Fortunately for us, this demon who was a torment to the worlds has been slain by you, and we too, O Lord, are now at ease in devotion to your lotus feet. So responsively we can read, the demigods address the Lord, all obeisances unto you. You are the enjoyer of all sacrifices, and you have assumed the form of a boar in pure goodness for the purpose of maintaining the world. Fortunately for us, this demon, who was a torment to the worlds, has been slain by you, and we too, O Lord, are now at ease in devotion to your lotus feet. So here's the purport. The material world consists of three modes: goodness, passion, and ignorance. But the spiritual world is pure goodness. It is said here that the form of the Lord is pure goodness, which means that it is not material. In the material world, there is no pure goodness. In the Bhāgavatam, the stage of pure goodness is called Sattvam Vishuddham. Vishuddham means pure. In pure goodness, there is no contamination by the two inferior qualities, namely passion and ignorance. The form of the boar, therefore, in which the Lord appeared, is nothing of the material world. There are many other forms of the Lord, but none of them belong to the material qualities. Such forms are non-different from the Vishnu form, and Vishnu is the enjoyer of all sacrifices. The sacrifices which are recommended in the Vedas are meant to please the Supreme Personality of Godhead. In ignorance only, people try to satisfy many other agents. But the real purpose of life is to satisfy the Supreme Lord Vishnu. All sacrifices are meant to please the Supreme Lord. The living entities who know this perfectly well are called demigods, godly or almost God. Since the living entity is part and parcel of the Supreme Lord, it is his duty to serve the Lord and please him. The demigods are all attracted to the personality of Godhead, and for their pleasure the demon, who was the source of trouble to the world, was killed. Purified life is meant to please the Lord, and all sacrifices performed in the purified life are called Krishna consciousness. This Krishna consciousness is developed by devotional service as clearly mentioned here. Deva uchuhu namo namaste kila yagya tantave stitau grihita malasattva murtaye distya hatoyam jagatam aruntudas tvatpada bhukya vayam isha nirvrtaha. The demigods address the Lord, all obeisances unto you. You are the enjoyer of all sacrifices, and you have assumed the form of a boar in pure goodness for the purpose of maintaining the world. Fortunately for us, this demon, who was a torment to the worlds, has been slain by you, and we too, O Lord, are now at ease in devotion to your lotus feet. Of course, I guess one immediate thing that's maybe not apparent is that only Hiranyaksha has been killed, not Hiranyakashipu, his brother. So there's still a very potent demon in the world. In fact, the more potent of the two. And as we said yesterday, there were three. There's actually Hiranyaksha and Hiranyakashipu, and they had a sister named Simhika. But I don't know if she was begotten at the same time as the other, her brothers. I think maybe not. But Simhika is the mother of Ketu and Rahu. So actually Ketu and Rahu are kind of the same, because when Rahu was sitting in the assembly, masquerading as a demigod, trying to get a share of nectar when all the demons had been apportioned out of the distribution by the Supreme Lord, who had taken the form of a beautiful woman. So the demons had been bamboozled, and the demigods were getting all the nectar. But Rahu figured it out, and he infiltrated the ranks of the demigods, and when he did so, he was ratted out by Chandra, the demigod of the moon. And when the Supreme Lord, as the beautiful woman, understood that this person who was trying to drink the nectar was actually a demon and not a demigod, so Mohini Murti then set her Sudarshan chakra, and it cut off the head of Rahu. But since his mouth had already touched the nectar of immortality, his head did not die, but the head and the body separated, and the head became Rahu and the body became Ketu. And so it is said that this is the mechanism on a subtle level of how eclipses happen, because Rahu eats the moon, but since he's only a head, the moon comes back out again. Similarly with the sun. So this is Rahu and Ketu, who were children of Simhika, the sister of Hiranyaksha and Hiranyakashipu. She doesn't enter into this pastime, apparently. Any rate, what's interesting here, too, is how we can look at this whole episode from a number of different angles. And interestingly, the whole world is like that. We can look at things from different angles, and they are all simultaneously valid or true. So here, the demigods are applauding the fact that this demon Hiranyaksha has been killed by the Supreme Lord in the form of a boar. They're happy that this has happened. And because they're happy that it's happened, they are feeling joy. They are actually very elated. However, seen from another angle, this was just a pastime of the Supreme Lord enjoying with one of his parshadas. So parshada means someone who is very dear to the Lord. So the Lord has many parshadas. And in this case, this was Jai or Vijay, one of the two. They were actually very dear servants of the Lord, and they volunteered for the assignment of taking the role of great, terrible demons. And so from one side, we see a demon fighting the Supreme Personality of Godhead and being killed, being struck indifferently at the root of the neck and losing his life. From another side, we see that the Supreme Lord is having fun in a pastime with one of his devotees. And in this way, we see that all things actually serve many purposes. And we see the Supreme Lord is capable of doing things on many levels at the same time. So although in general, we have, as we can talk about this Bhagavad Gita 4:7, 4:8, I think it is, yada yada hi dharmasya glanir bhavati bharata bhutanam adharmasya tadatmanam srijamyaham. So in order to give pleasure to the devotees and to annihilate the miscreants, I invent myself millennium after millennium. So the Supreme Lord gives pleasure to the devotees. In this case, by annihilating the demon, he was giving pleasure to the devotees and annihilating the demon in one stroke. So the demon was the devotee. In one sense, that's a kind of strangely ironic thing. But it's all good in the Supreme Lord. But the demons, they serve a purpose too. The whole thing actually fits together like a giant puzzle, with everything making some sense in the whole wide scheme of things. In many religions, and also in general, when people think about God, they wonder, why can't God just wipe out all the demons? And then everything would be fine, right? All the demons would be gone, and we could, have donuts and strawberries every day, and pizza, and then we wouldn't have to worry about anything, right? Because all the demons are gone. But why doesn't God do that then? And it seems kind of strange. And many times, people who are atheistic, they point to this fact, and they suggest that because there are demoniac people, then certainly there cannot be a God. That either God is incapable of getting rid of them, as some people have the false conception that God is unable to get rid of the demoniac people. Or on the other side of the coin, that he doesn't want to get rid of them for some reason, and he likes to see people suffer. He's some kind of sadist or something like that. So both of these are false and wrong conceptions. actually, the demons also serve a purpose. As we find out in the whole Vedic scheme of things, that when a person performs sinful activity, which is known technically in Sanskrit as papa, so sin is called papa, there is a retribution for that sin, which is called vikarma, or it comes back. There is a negative reaction when one is engaging in sinful action. Then in the future, there is a boomerang reaction that will come upon a person, and that is the process of karma, that by performing papa, one gets vikarma, or sinful reaction. Now, that sinful reaction can come of one of three channels or three methods. We know of them as adibhotic, adidaivic, and adhyatmic miseries. So, adhyatmic miseries are miseries we inflict upon ourselves, our worrying, our smashing our hand in the door, our smoking cigarettes and turning our teeth brown and destroying our lungs. These are ways that we cause ourselves to suffer. Then there's adidaivic miseries, which are miseries that are visited upon us by the demigods, like extreme heat, extreme cold, droughts, famines, diseases. These are sort of circumstantial environmental sufferings that we undergo according to our previous bad karma. Now, the third method is what's called adibhotic miseries. Adibhotic miseries are miseries inflicted by others. So, Prabhupada sometimes says, dog bite, mosquitoes, etc. thing. But besides that, of course, there are the biting words of friends and family members or enemies. Some cases, the direct attack by competitors or enemies. And on a larger scale, sometimes a particular living entity gets put in the position of being the source of karma, the source of bad karma for a number of people, for a quite large group or assortment of people. So in this way, someone is like Hiranyaksha, Hiranyakashipu. They aren't just the source of misery for a couple of three people. They're the source of misery for a whole wide swath of people, a whole, in Hiranyaksha's case, the entire material universe. He and his brother were really shaking things down, so they were creating problems on a lot of levels. And this way is the way that living entities get their bad karma. So the demigods, of course, they're involved in organizing the universe, and the demons are directly creating a problem in that department. So the demigods are happy the demon's gone. The regular living entities are happy because they're not being tortured by these demons. The demon here in Yaksha is gone. And of course, the Lord is having his fun. And the Lord is taking the form of a boar, and that, I'm sure to most people seems like the most outrageous thing. Why would the Lord come in the form of a pig, a boar, of all things, Of course, we know that the Vedic literatures tell us that he comes in all kinds of species to give various enthusiasm to living entities in whatever shape they may be. In this particular case, he was taking the form of a boar. And of course, his reason for taking the form of a boar was that the earth was fallen into a Garbhodaka ocean, and boars are good at lifting things from up underground or underwater, and so the Lord assumed this form. He could have assumed any form he wanted, but this is what he chose to do. And for him, it's no different. So he did this, and he enjoyed this kind of play. And now everybody is feeling a sense of denouement or relief that this is now all over. So Prabhupada mentions the three modes of nature. Of course, the Supreme Lord, even though he might be in the form of a boar, is not stinky and nasty. He is actually has a body made of pure goodness. In other words, it's not at all a material body. It's the same thing. The spiritual world is all made from the mode of pure goodness, or Visuddha Sattva, whereas the material world is actually comprised of Rajas, Tamas, and Sattva, or goodness, passion, ignorance. In three, they come together. And they are constantly interacting, and as we hear in Bhagavad Gita, they're always competing for supremacy. Sometimes the mode of goodness is prominent, and it puts down the mode of passion and ignorance. Sometimes the mode of passion is prominent, and the mode of goodness and the mode of ignorance are reduced. And sometimes the mode of ignorance reigns and eclipses both the mode of passion and goodness. And so there's constant competition for supremacy. Now, not only is there a kind of mode that is present in whatever environment that we're in, but also we have a mode present within us. And if a person is sufficiently engaged in devotional service, they carry within themselves a mode of goodness that is that allows them to become impervious to whatever's happening outside to a certain extent. However, most people don't have much of a reservoir of the mode of goodness within. So whatever mode is prominent on the outside, they become colored by that mode. They become absorbed in that mode. And they become usually manipulated by that mode. So people who are genuinely, mostly in the mode of goodness, they will feel comfortable when the external world is predominantly the mode of goodness. People who are predominantly in the mode of passion will feel comfortable when the external environment is predominantly in the mode of passion. And similarly, people who are in the mode of ignorance will feel comfortable when the external world is predominantly mode of ignorance. So when the external mode is goodness, a person in the mode of passion will feel bored and listless, and a person who is in the mode of ignorance will feel uncomfortable and want to go somewhere else. Similarly, when things are in the mode of passion, a person in the mode of goodness will want to duck out of it, and will feel too much happening in a very difficult way. And a person in the mode of ignorance will feel also similarly pushed around, because people in the mode of ignorance are not really up for doing things very much. They want to just kind of laze and become inert. Similarly, in the mode of when the mode of ignorance is present, those in the mode of goodness will feel very uncomfortable and want to go somewhere else, and those in the mode of passion will feel that there's not enough going on, So these are how we're affected. But since the mode only apply to the material world and material matter, then these do not have anything to do with the Supreme Personality of Godhead. There is obviously a difference between the material matter that makes up the material world and the subtle world, and similarly the soul itself. The soul is not even subtle matter. The soul is absolute. The soul is Visuddha Sattva. However, the material world is based on the modes of nature, particularly matter, and there is something called subtle matter, which is mind, intelligence, and false ego. And this is also matter, but of a more refined or a more difficult to perceive type. So mind, intelligence, and false ego, none of these are available to the senses. We can't directly see mind. We can't directly see intelligence. We can't directly see false ego. Nor can we smell, hear, taste, or touch either of these three. They are only perceptible indirectly by their effect that they have on others. And so one final point that I want to get to here is that I'm going to, in general, in the classes that I give, sometimes repeat certain points because I think they're very important and they're very useful in our dealing with people on the outside. So oftentimes people will say, how can you possibly believe that the Supreme Lord took the form of a pig and he fought a demon and the demon was killed and the earth was plunged into the Garba ocean? All this seems like hopeless mythology, pre-scientific, mythology, basically. How can anyone in the modern world ever have any kind of belief in such things? Of course, oftentimes we will feel behind the eight ball trying to answer such an accusation or try to respond to such things. But it's not so difficult if we take a little bit of a closer look at what's really going on. In our world, mostly people have been raised in a Western philosophical system. We've been talking about that. And generally, philosophy, according to the Western system, is based on certain fundamentals. We've been talking about fundamentals, and we've been talking about certain epistemological acceptable laws. So in our world, in our modern, and I'm going to call it our modern scientific mythology, we have certain kinds of accepted norms. And that is that there are laws. These are laws that govern the universe. Laws like E equals mc squared, F equals ma, the Maxwell's equations, Bernoulli principles, Kirchhoff's law. There's so many different material physics and electronics and mathematical laws. And it is assumed that these are all inviolable, that these laws never change under any circumstances. These laws are irrevocable. Nobody can get around them. But there is no proof of that. Certainly they do hold for the most part. I would never argue that they don't. But there's no proof that these laws are fixed. We don't even know that these laws exist outside of our solar system, or maybe that they existed 10,000 years ago, the way that we see them today. No one was around to measure these principles or to take a scientific evaluation of them. So, as I've said before, the material atheistic paradigm sees the laws, and those laws are where you start. You have to start somewhere. So for them, you have the laws. For us, we have the lawmaker. So therefore, the laws are made by somebody, and the laws can change if that maker wants them to change. So on the materialistic, atheistic paradigm, everything boils down to atoms. And the atoms, if you boil them down to what they basically are, they're defined by mathematical equations, basically. Like the uncertainty principle, and of course the Heisenberg, no, not the Heisenberg principle, but the, I can't think of the name of the scientist that has the mathematics that describes how the atoms work. Maybe it'll come to me in a minute, but at any rate, there are these mathematical laws, and you can't see electrons, you can't hear them, you can't smell them, you can't taste them, you can't touch them. In fact, what we call sight or light is an effect of them, not one, but millions and billions of them before we can see it. The effect we call sound is millions and billions of atoms moving together in harmony and producing what we call sound. So they have no sensory properties. What are they? They're simply mathematical entities. Now, on our side, on the spiritual paradigm, we take it a step further, and we say that these atoms are energies of the Supreme Lord. So therefore, it's the Supreme Lord who decides what they do, ultimately. And he sets them up to act in a specific way in the material world. So when people say that it's not possible for the Lord to take the form of a boar, or pull the earth up out of some Garba ocean, or any of these kind of things, is because they assume that these mechanical laws are the final bottom line of everything. Nothing can change them, nothing can supersede them, nothing can suspend them, because they are the final bottom line. That's where we start. All of Western, basically Western philosophy is based on these basic concepts. And certainly modern science is. At least modern atheistic, materialistic science is based on this concept that everything boils down to laws, it boils down to atoms. But on our side, we say that there is no proof of the fact that these things can't change. There's no proof of the fact that the atoms are actually the energy of the Supreme Lord, and they do his beckoning. So when we look at it from that level, in fact, even modern science fiction tropes talk about the possibility that we're living in some kind of virtual reality, and indeed we are. This virtual reality is scientifically measurable in the form of atoms and energy of various kinds. However, the idea of a virtual reality is the fact that it is actually, in fact, the Supreme Lord's external energy doing its dance. And therefore, there are things going on behind the scenes. They're not just these various laws acting, like the relationship between matter and energy, like F equals ma, like various equations of Maxwell. Those things may be acting, but there's also other things acting, subtle things acting, and beyond that, the spiritual substratum altogether. Now, those who believe only in matter, only in what we call physicalism, so physicalism is another name for materialism. It gets called physicalism these days because it is a more modern version of it, where we call it physicalism because it includes the things that physics studies, not just matter, but energy as well, and possibly these other things that we call dark matter and dark energy and whatnot. So these things are all part of physicalism. What we are making the point of is that there are other causative forces and dynamics that are not physical in the usual sense that science measures. There are subtle forces, like, for instance, the force of karma. Like, for instance, the force of desire. You can't put desire in a test tube. As far as I know, there are no meters that can measure the intensity of desire. Yet is the force. We can say, that World War II happened. It wasn't because some chemicals did something, but there was some desire by a certain group of people to do a certain thing, and another desire by another group of people that they sure didn't want them to do that thing. And so the whole world was, upended, and, a big portion of them destroyed, and a huge amount of people died, not because of some chemistry, not because of some electricity or some atoms swaying one way or another, but because of the force of desire. So desire is certainly a force. So not only that, but there's a lot of subtle cause and effect going on. And most people are aware that there is subtle effects going on, as Krishna Kripa was mentioning the other day, that if we were going to challenge the notion that these things can't exist, then we have to ask the question, does any of this, we call it, Hare Krishna slang, we call it subtle energy, but in the regular world it's called paranormal, So the paranormal, people who are materialistic, atheistic scientists have to exclude every variety of paranormal. And there are so many varieties of paranormal. You have ghosts, you have cryptids, you have aliens, you have reincarnation, you have ESP, you have remote viewing. Now, someone who is an atheistic, materialistic scientist, such a person will have to debunk and deny every one of these paranormal types of phenomenon. And mostly everybody in the world has at one time crossed path with some aspect of the paranormal. They've had a direct experience of it. And so therefore, only a very few people are still able to maintain their denial that subtle causes and subtle effects are not also at play in our world. And certainly there are a lot of strange things going on. So they've been documented by people, as Krishna Kripa was mentioning the other day, that this Ian Stevenson racked up some 3,000, 5,000 cases of children who remembered past lives and gave testimonies, and those testimonies were evaluated later on to see if they were credible. The children had no way of knowing no way of knowing about some person's previous life unless they had actually been that person. How would they come by this information? So there's so many things like that. People have experienced ghosts. People experience ghosts all the time in our world. What are they? No scientific explanation. No scientific explanation for music. No scientific explanation for feeling good. No scientific explanation for what is actually good government, So these kind of things are outside atheistic materialistic science. And so atheistic materialistic science must be limited. They can measure certain things, they can deal with certain things, and outside of that, they fail. And again, as Krishna Kripa was also mentioning the other day, that the biggest embarrassment is consciousness, which has absolutely no common foundation of discussion in modern science. Each investigator into consciousness has a completely different angle and take on it. And so the fact that you have something that's so obvious, something that's such a part of our everyday world, and yet there's no scientific consensus about it, or even anything approaching it, is an embarrassment for science. And it shows that there is something that is not material, that it can't be measured in the way science usually measures things. And not only that, but there's so many things that can't be measured in the way science usually measures things. And so such things are, by their very definition, not open to the scientific method. And if they aren't, that means there's some part of the world that science doesn't enter. So when they say they're giving us a theory of everything, it's not a theory of everything. It's a theory of things that scientists can measure and no more. There's all this other stuff that they can't measure and can't talk about reliably. And all right, so there's, by the way, I'll just put this in as a very end here, that there's a devotee named Akandati who is doing a series of lectures called the Atma Paradigm. And you can Google it on that. And he has a whole series of lectures. He's part of the Bhaktivedanta Institute. And he's describing some of these very same things. And I think in general, we need to be able to be comfortable in talking about these things. And, you know, of course, some people will never be won over because they're either vested in material atheistic science, or else in some cases there are people who actually know that material atheistic science is only a part of the picture, but they have some motivation, some ulterior motivation to push forward that theory. All right, so I'm going to end there. We have not really any time left, but if anyone wants to ask a final question, then maybe we can fit that in. We got started kind of late because everything was kind of stacked against us here.
Hare Krishna, thank you for the talk. It was very nice. Material scientists is something we're going to encounter a lot. Even in my own family, of course, I deal with those kind of questions. This is all mythology. Why do you believe this stuff? Why do you believe that he incarnated in all these different forms that Bhāgavatam says he did? I mean, one question is, I don't know if we really quite addressed how to address people who are completely skeptical about the historicity of Vedic scripture.
Right. Well, it's reasonable to be skeptical of Vedic scriptures. But what we have to really realize is that the Vedic literatures give a huge body of information about what our world is, how it works, and how to orient yourself in the material world in such a way that you will ultimately be satisfied and happy. There is no other body of knowledge that discusses politics, epistemology, ontology, logic. It discusses the ancient past. It discusses the future. It discusses particularly morality and ethics and value theory. All these things are discussed in Vedic literature. There isn't any other body of information that touches on all these things. Certainly science doesn't. Most of the other scriptures don't cover all these things either. So it's worth checking out to see here's a huge body of information that's self-consistent and very exhaustive. And then try to see if the particular method that we're putting forward, that if one tries to serve the Supreme Lord, one will actually become happy. And if you try that in your life, you can be as skeptical as you want. And if you actually try doing it, you'll notice that you actually become happy. So, as they say, the proof is in the pudding. And so that's one of the things that we could put forward. It's necessary that some people will be skeptical. It's reasonable that some people may not even want to try the process. But then they have to say that they've rejected it without actually giving it an investigation. So if you don't investigate something, then you're really not going to know anything about it. Yeah.
To add to that, thank you, Maharaj. I always appreciate how nicely you approach these Bhāgavatam classes and give us something to take away. I was reading His Holiness Devamrita Swami's little book, Hiding an Unnatural Happiness, and his proposals and things like that. And it's like a thing that we can take away too. Like when people are skeptical, it's like if they're especially if they're scientifically minded, then you can turn it back on them and just simply say, as Maharaj was saying, like you're not actually doing the experiment. So just like you're a scientist, you want to figure something out, but you don't want to do the experiment, who's going to actually listen to you? So just another...
yeah, right. If you're not going to do the experiment, you don't have the right to talk about.
Right. Yeah, it's like...
I mean, you can talk about something, but you have to admit your ignorance or your lack of, taking the actual experiment in your own hands and doing it. So, of course, people can say, well, there's so many things you could try. Yes, there indeed are so many things you can try. But this particular system, the Vedic system, has so many special things about it that it's worth at least checking it out. And if you don't do that, then you really aren't in a position to say, the Vedic system is very old. The Vedic system is referenced by an enormous quantity of people on the earth. The Vedic system talks about so many diverse subject matters. The Vedic system is amazingly self-consistent. The Vedic system is very ancient. All those things are adjectives that cannot be ascribed to a lot of things. Very few things you can say all those things about. So at any rate, we can, I guess, stop there. So thank you all very much for your kind attention. All glories to Śrimad Bhāgavatam. All glories to the Vaishnava devotees of the Lord. Hare Krishna. Haribo.